Hi, I'm David Lawrence. I'm one of the directors at Grant McGregor. Together with Doug, our head of technology, we're going to explore some of the benefits of moving and migrating to Microsoft Azure. Hi, Doug. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Good, good. So today we're going to talk about Microsoft Azure. It's probably a good starting point to maybe explain what is Microsoft Azure.
Yeah, so Microsoft Azure or Azure, a couple of different ways to say it, and I'll probably say it in both ways throughout this. So Azure is a cloud hosting platform, and that means that it's just a back-end service that you can run infrastructure on, you can run services on. Um, Azure has over 200 different services available to it, so it's not just one thing. To a business, it provides many different options for what you can use it for.
And I think, and that's a good analogy. And when people think of Azure or cloud technology, I think they get a little bit uh, confused, or maybe they don't understand the technology. And I think people are used to a physicality of servers or storage devices that their data is stored on locally that they can touch and feel. How does that differ from Azure?
Yeah, so Azure can be used for many different things, but one of the most common things to use it for would be hosting of traditional servers and data. So if people are used to on-premise infrastructure, a server with disks and that sort of thing, Azure can emulate that. You can have servers running in Azure. But Azure can also be used for much more than that. You can use it to host your data without a server. You can run databases from it. It provides security to your business as well. So, from a traditional infrastructure sense, it's definitely a replacement for that, but it can offer many other things as well.
Right. And one of the other aspects, I think you said there's always applications. So typically having an on-premise server, either in a server room or in the back office cupboard, where people were used to seeing that an SQL database, a management system, a bespoke application system, that can be run from Azure as well.
Yeah, so you can run these sorts of things from Azure in a couple of different ways. So you can run them in a traditional sense as a server. So you could have a server running in Azure with Windows on it, with Microsoft SQL running from it, and provide like for like what you have on premise. A more modern way of doing that is to provide these things as a service. So
Right.
rather than a server, so you could have SQL as a service or a website as a service, and that provides the same functionality, but without the overhead and the need to configure and maintain a server.
So that subscription model that I think people are very used to now and comfortable paying, I think if I understand you correctly, traditionally, when you bought a server, you had that CapEx cost of a server,
Yeah.
and then you had the CapEx cost of the operating system and the application over a period of time. And I think what you're saying is now that for Azure is a subscription, a monthly subscription?
Yeah. So Azure is a subscription based model,
Right.
and that's typically based on the performance and the spec of the server or the service that you're putting in place, as well as the runtime of that. So the number of hours per month that you're running it for. So that's different to an on-premise where you would just buy the server up front with the licensing and all these sorts of things. Um, it can be a monthly cost. It can also be done upfront as a yearly cost, and they do offer reserved pricing as well, which rather than being flexible month to month, you would say, I'm going to use this server for this period of time, and they would give you a discount on that.
Good. That's good to know. For organizations that are still using on-premise server or storage, I suppose, and architects, I think, are quite a good example of that. they traditionally still have physical servers and storage on their premise. What would you say is the biggest reason to start thinking about Azure?
Well, most organizations start to look at their infrastructure when it starts to age or impact their business, either through the cost of replacement or productivity day to day. So, if you have an aging infrastructure and you're considering replacement of that infrastructure, then it would be worth looking at cloud alternatives rather than just going down the traditional route of saying, our server's coming to the end of life, let's buy a new server. That's one way to do it, but there are certainly more modern ways of doing things now.
Okay, that's good to know. I think that's always good to give people options. As you say, you've got the advantages of cloud storage, with Azure. But why do you think that some organizations are reluctant to move to Azure? I mean, some of the fears or maybe misconceptions that they have.
I think some of the challenges we come up against from organizations when looking to move to Azure or any cloud services um, around cost. They may assume that it's a more expensive route
Right.
when in fact, in most instances, it can be a cost saving. Also, a lot of organizations don't have the in house technical skill or knowledge to be able to conduct the migration. So that can be a barrier to entry. And people, they do tend to have misgivings about access to Azure. How can I access my data once it's in Azure? Because they're used to having their PC in their office with the server sat next to them. So they think it's nice and easy. But if I put that into Azure, well, how am I going to get access to the data? And there are many different ways of accessing the data in Azure, but it's designed to be accessed easily and remotely.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, and probably tied to securely, and I'm old enough to realize or remember rather, people moving from filing cabinets with their files in it, and they moved it to standalone computers, PCs, and the fear because it was even then a virtual digitized version of that file.
Yeah.
But we got used to physically seeing the PC, again, looking and touching at it, and now people move to servers. Again, you could see and feel it, and the data was secure in their own premise. And then moving again now to a virtual cloud Azure environment, it's a mindset and condition that people are getting used to. But I think arguably more secure in those environments as well.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the questions that we get around security involves, well, I'm not in control directly of that server anymore. I've got a server sat next to me in the office. I know who has access to that server. I can physically see it. But if it's in the cloud, then who has access to it? Yeah, so security comes up in discussions around cloud services quite often. And when a server is sat in your office next to you, you're in full control of that, and you know who can access it and how it can be accessed. But putting servers or data into Azure, you're taking advantage of enterprise grade data centers and security and everything that surrounds that.
Right.
So if you have a server in the office, it's reliant on your internet connection, your building security, your backup power, and all these sorts of things. Whereas if it's in the Azure data center, there is redundancy across that data center, across multiple data centers, as well as the back end that Microsoft offer through their, hardware enterprise level firewalls.
Yeah, I think there's some good points there. And as you highlight the storage of your data critically, I think, because that's really what we're trying to ring fence, is more secure than it would be on an on-premise storage device or server. It's in the cloud, and as you've highlighted, only the right people at the right time can access that data with those enterprise level controls.
Yeah.
But actually, probably a point, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not like an enterprise price though. You get an enterprise service, but not at an enterprise cost.
Yeah, Azure is a completely flexible and scalable platform. So you would pick the level of redundancy and flexibility that is appropriate to your business.
Right.
So, out the box, at the lowest level, a server in Azure is replicated across 3 cabinets. So, in effect, you're getting 3 servers as redundancy.
Oh, right. Okay.
That can be expanded to replicating to another data center in the same country, replicating to multiple data centers in multiple countries. And that then approaches the enterprise level of redundancy, but you don't have to go for that. You can start small and build from there.
So yeah, I think what you're saying is the flexibility. I know from even our own organization that if we had invested in a physical server, we would expect that to last 3 or 5 years. But once we had more use for it or a need for it, we would have to replace that with a physical server. Or if we felt that we didn't need that server after 2 years, that investment is still made. And what you're saying with Azure is actually you can spin servers up and down, and actually you can say we have a need now for storage, or we have a need now for the service, but yet we're not tied to it for any length of time as we would with a physical server.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the advantages of cloud over on-premises. On-premise, you've bought the hardware, and whether you use it or not, you're stuck with it. And if your business grows, you either have to buy more hardware or try and squeeze it into what you've got. Um, Azure allows flexibility of these sorts of things. So if your business grows, if your data grows, it's very easy to add additional specifications, additional storage, additional redundancy. If your business shrinks or if you decommission an application, no longer have need of that server, just a case of switching it off, and that saves all of the money that you would have otherwise spent on it.
It's good to know. It's certainly more agile.
Yeah.
What is the role of a trusted partner like us to help organizations navigate or migrate to Azure?
So the role of a trusted partner for Azure would be planning of migrations to Azure, as well as doing some of the heavy lifting around migrating and setting up the servers and the applications that go along with it. Talking to the relevant third parties. Most organizations, if they run in-house applications, will have a third party that supports that. So we can liaise with that third party and ask the difficult and the technical questions. And after the migration is complete, support of that. So there is someone that you can reach out to easily and get answers to technical questions far easier than you would be able to if you tried to do that directly with Microsoft.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. I think trusted partners like us, removing the complexity and the worry and the anxiety of making that change. Because, we know from experience technology in any disguise, making a change can be uncomfortable and anxious. So removing that with our expertise, speaking English, I think critically as well, not complexity the journey for the customer, but making it a smooth transition, uh, I think is definitely a strength, removing that uh, concern and the decision that's been made.
Yeah, which goes back to what I was saying about some of the barriers to entry earlier on. A lot of organizations don't have the technical in-house skill to.
Because they're not doing it every day, right?
They're not doing it all the time regularly, whereas we are. So we can help with the technical understanding and as you say, translating that into plain English that makes sense to people.
Good. We were talking earlier about the on-premise servers and storage, uh, moving it. We've talked about some of those advantages to moving it to Azure. We talked about, for example, cost savings, and I think that's right. What about some of the other advantages? I mean, I think if you're a business owner, an organization owner, okay, cost is one thing, but productivity advantages? Is there productivity advantages to moving to Azure?
Well, there's certainly always productivity advantages to modernizing your IT.
Right.
And if you have a growing business, then moving to Azure, the scalability that offers will allow you to keep your staff productive. What you don't want is as you onboard more staff, your static system starts to creak, and you have no way of expanding that or improving it. Whereas Azure does offer that. Um, Also, in the world these days, with everybody working remote and hybrid and all these sorts of things, um, Azure offers many ways of accessing it remotely, often a lot easier than on-premise solutions, which rely on the internet connection in the office generally, rather than Azure's enterprise level internet connection.
I saw that right with some clients a number of years ago, especially architect firms that had their servers on premise and their storage on premise, and that they were growing,
Yeah.
and that they were not just growing in the uh, headquarters, but moving to different cities right across the UK. And suddenly these regional offices, buildings were connected into the central office and here in Scotland. And you had that headache uh, or the barrier rather, of access and that data and the limitations from all these different places going into sort of that hub and spoke.
Yeah. So that quite often comes across from the users to the stakeholders in the organization as the IT system being slow.
Okay.
I work in a remote office, and when I'm working on my data, it's slow. And they'll quite often look at the server or the IT and say, well, why is it slow? We've spent loads of money on this. And it can often be a bandwidth constraint. If you've got lots of users in lots of different offices all connecting back to a single server in one office, there's a high chance it'll saturate the internet connection.
Yes, of course.
You can alleviate some of that saturation by using the cloud instead, and then everyone's connecting to the cloud from different locations as opposed to coming into your main office.
And I think that final point that you make is perfect because that hub and spoke mentality with that central office and the regional offices, that's the hub and these are the spokes. But when your data and storage and your applications in Azure cloud, all these different locations are going direct to that. And guess what? Microsoft has made that investment that they've got the great internet connections. They're not going to have that limitation on bandwidth.
Yeah, Microsoft's bandwidth in their data centers is obviously a lot greater than what any of us can wish for in our offices.
Doug, we talked about what is Azure. I think that's been helpful. We've talked about the cost savings that Microsoft Azure can bring. I think we've also talked about the productivity and critically, a forgotten subject is the poor person, the user that's trying to access this storage. So we see the advantages of moving to clouds, Azure, Microsoft Azure. But what does a migration process look like? If you've got a on-premise server or on-premise storage or an application like a management system, a housing system, a CRM system, what does the typical migration look like?
So a typical migration for Azure, there would be some assumption that you are already using 365 services
Right.
for perhaps email. A lot of people are using 365 these days for email. There's not a lot of Exchange servers out there anymore. So that would be a good starting point. If you're not already using 365, then at least getting onto the 365 platform Azure aside would be a good start.
Okay.
Email, SharePoint, something like that. Um, After that, it would be an assessment or a plan revolving around your on-premise infrastructure. So we would look to understand what you have in place at the moment, what servers you have, what applications you're running, what they do in the business, how people connect to them, how much data you have, what type of data, and identify whether it's fit for purpose to move to the cloud, whether there would be a business benefit in moving it to the cloud, and then what that migration route would look like.
Okay.
Typically, you wouldn't migrate everything at once. You would do it in stages. So you would maybe migrate your data first. And after that, you would look at migrating one application. And that way you can communicate it properly to the staff in the business. You can make sure things are working and that you can roll back if you need to. A big bang approach is probably not the best way of doing it.
Right. I mean, you would want to mitigate against some of the changes that are being made and make sure it's communicated. And I think there is a very clear migration plan from us, but also, correct me if I'm wrong, Microsoft have some really nice tool sets that help with a migration as well.
Yeah, so Microsoft have migration assessment tools
Yeah.
we can run against servers and infrastructure. They'll give you an idea of the recommended server or solution in Azure that you could migrate to, as well as some idea of the costs that would be associated with that.
That's good to know. We talked a lot about Microsoft Azure, hopefully remove some of the fear and some of the complexity. I think if somebody out there was still worried or concerned about moving to Azure, uh, how is it as complicated as it sounds?
So Azure in itself can be a complicated system, but it doesn't have to be when it comes to migrating infrastructure to it.
Right.
Um, my advice would be to take it in small steps, to start slow and understand what's moving, why it's moving, when it's going to move, and how it's moving. So start with one thing, just move one application to Azure, and that's really no more complicated than moving an application from a server on premise to another server on premise. The only real difference is that you're running a server in Azure as opposed to running it in your building. So the process would effectively be the same. Assess, ensure it meets the system requirements, and conduct the migration. Communicate to staff how they access the application in the new location. Um, and then you can expand from there. Another application, some data, and before you know it, everything's in Azure, and you can shut down your old server.
And I think that's a good observation. If a physical server, an on-premise server, came to its end of life, that needs to be migrated to a new physical server. And as you said, that isn't any more complicated than doing that, but with Azure, and actually in some cases easier.
Yeah. I think what some people see as the complexity of moving to Azure is what I mentioned earlier about applications as a service. There can be some complexity there, but that really relies on the application itself or the vendor associated with it supporting that. So if you were looking to transition from, say, a Microsoft SQL server on premise to SQL as a service, there is a degree of complexity there, but you would hope that the vendor or the third party would support that migration route because their application would be written to support it.
Yeah.
If you're simply looking just moving server to server, as we said, it's really no more difficult than moving from an on-premise server to an on-premise server.
That's good to know. We've talked, Doug, about the advantages of moving to on-premise storage server to Azure. I think we've covered some of the cost-benefit analysis, the productivity. But actually what we've not talked about is the business continuity aspect of, or the strength of Azure with the business continuity actually compared to an on-premise server. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Azure offers a lot of different business recovery and business continuity tools. So in the traditional sense, you can back up data that's in Azure, whether it's in a service or a server. So you would back up that data on a sort of traditional backup cycle, once a day, once every 4 hours, or something like that. Recovery of that is often a lot easier than it would be in an on-premise infrastructure, as you're not relying on actually recovering the data from, say, a storage device to a server or from the cloud to an on-premise server. It's right next to it in Azure, effectively. It is separate for redundancy's sake, but as far as Azure is concerned, it's just moving from one place in Azure to another. So if you're recovering a server, it's a very quick thing to do.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know. And that throughput and that investment, as we said earlier, about the enterprise level of what you're buying into, but not at that enterprise price, you're getting access to all that business continuity that I think very large organizations had been used to.
Yeah. So what I talked about there was the recovery aspect. There's also the uh, continuity aspect that Azure offers, whereby you can have your backup in place, but you can also have redundant servers in place.
Okay.
So that it is maybe an expansion for later on for businesses, or depending on your need for uptime, um, you can have duplicates of servers. So if you run a very high availability, high priority, customer facing web server, you can have that redundant across as many servers as you like. So if the original server goes down, the next server just comes straight back up. Uh, you can even take that a step further to split the load of that application across multiple servers. So if you have a very demanding application, you can have it split across servers, and when that demand increases, it will automatically spin up more servers to manage that demand.
Okay, I understand. It's a bit like the Inland Revenue website at the end of January every year. That demand, people leave it to the last moment. The web servers are very slow. But what you're saying is Azure, I think the flexibility, is there as you've described, and you just wouldn't have that with an on-premise solution, would you?
No, I imagine companies like maybe Ticketmaster for booking concert tickets or something, they would use a very similar system in that they would have cloud-based servers. When the booking of the ticket goes live and they suddenly have a massive influx of people all needing to buy tickets, you can bet that their cloud system is sat in the background spinning up more servers as that demand increases.
That's good to know. I actually think you're bringing that down to a little bit to a smaller level, to an SME, a small organization that might have a management system for customer service, and maybe certain parts of the year, say a membership system that is busy at, say, in August once a year. Again, you've got that technology that you can just stretch the performance, and you buy that for a short period of time, then just scale it back.
Yeah, so if you have an application which most of the year, most of the month, most of the week, whatever, it is not really being used, you can run that on a very low spec server that doesn't cost much, or you can run it for a limited period of time. So, one thing we haven't talked about really is that a traditional on premise server, you have no choice really but to run it 24 hours a day.
Yes.
Azure servers, the cost of those is really based on the number of hours that they run for. So if you only need a server during working hours, you can only run that server during working hours and save money on the rest of the time. And that can be translated into those high peak traffic moments where if you know that there's something upcoming and that server is going to be needed at 2 o'clock in the morning, or there's going to be extra people using it, you can just dynamically increase the spec or increase the runtime for that short period and then put it back down again.
And that's very similar to electricity or gas, home energy, those peak times when you want to use it, you're paying for it, you're consuming it. And then when you switch that off, as I do during the night, I'm not paying for my electricity or my gas. So, we've talked a lot about the benefits of Azure, and hopefully we've removed some of the worries and concerns that people might have. We talked about the benefits, and clearly the benefits outweigh the disadvantages of not doing it. Uh, the migration from on-premise to Azure, what advice would you give to organizations considering moving to Azure now they know a little bit about it?
I think the first bit of advice I would give would be to just think about what you have at the moment and what the reason you might have for wanting to move it to the cloud or to Azure specifically would be. And then just to pick up the phone and reach out to us. In most instances, Azure is a good fit for organizations. There will be the exceptions, but most of the time, moving to Azure will either be a cost saving, or it will be a productivity gain or a security gain. There's lots of good reasons. So yeah, just get in touch and we can help answer those questions.
And we've seen that with our customer base and customers that we've helped with that migration, that I mean, we look after net 300 servers, and there's a very small percentage now, just a couple of physical servers, I think, that we still look after. So you can see the market shift. Oh, sorry, more importantly, the confidence that people have now made that jump to Azure over the last 10 years, really.
Yeah, we've seen a drastic change in the type of servers that people have. As you say, 5, 10 years ago, the majority of the servers we looked after were on-premise traditional servers. And exactly as you say, we probably have 2 or 3 on-premise servers left for very specific use cases. And the other, few hundred servers are all in Azure, running away quite happily.
And lastly, I think people think of Azure as Azure Cloud Services as for servers running applications or web servers or SQL servers, as you said. But actually, we're seeing more and more people using Azure, maybe even as a bolt onto the physical servers, where they're putting storage, the data storage, into Azure, cold or hot storage.
Yeah. So as we'd said at the very beginning, Azure offers hundreds of different services, and servers are just one of those services. Um, as an example, what you mentioned there, storage. Azure offers storage accounts,
Right.
and they are effectively a large storage area, disks with no server attached to them, that can be tiered in their performance. So you could have an archive solution. If you have an on-premise server and you're thinking, God, the server's getting full, I need to do something with all this data, you can move it to a cold storage
Okay.
solution in Azure, which is low cost, and then that frees up some space for you.
Oh, it's good to know. Good to know. Today's discussion, we've hopefully inspired you, or to at least to think about Microsoft Azure, some of the benefits, uh, removing the fear and anxiety and worry about the migration of making that leap over to Azure. It's really not scary. And hopefully it's given you confidence to at least to pick up the phone to us and have that conversation. So let's get started.